Hey folks, welcome back to Only Best Fantasy Novels. My name is Robin, and today I want to talk about my favorite books that came out in the last 3 months that came out October, November, December. These aren't necessarily the biggest releases of the last 3 months, these are just my favorite ones. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it because I have like a dozen books to talk about here. The first one I want to highlight is Harry Nennis's The Works of Vermin, and this is a great phantasmagoric story that blends fantasy and horror in a really creative way. It's a story with art where art plays a really cool concept in multiple forms, art in multiple forms, and what we have is this autocratic city where this monster wreaks havoc. We have the story in particular that we follow is that of an exterminator who tries to go after it, and from there the story gets really wild because it deals with multiple timelines and these kind of things. Like it's really inventively crafted, really creatively put together, and it's easily one of the more imaginative fantasy books that I've read this year. Yeah, like I can easily see this book making rounds at awards next year. Not necessarily the standard genre awards, but like more the niche stuff. Definitely want to check out if you like fantasy that's off the beaten path. Like this book, I think fans of Baslag in particular, Perdido Street Station, I think they would find a lot to love with this particular book. Do with that what you will. The next book I want to talk about is Sungil Kim's Blood for the Undying Throne, and this is a follow-up to his Blood of the Old Kings from last year. But this book is very different from that one. In this one, we have a cast of characters who are very much dealing with the repercussions of their decisions, they're battling with their ideas, with some key ideas, and battling with themselves as well with the choices that they've made. In addition to all of that, we have in terms of like the larger plot story, we have cracks beginning to form as a result of the events. Cracks that begin to form in the government that as a result of the events in the first book, and as a result of that, it opens the door for a particularly brutal faction to take control. On top of all of that, we get a deep delve into the past, into the mystery surrounding one of the more significant events in this world's history that we talk about. So there's quite a lot that goes on in this book, and it deals with it's a much more human focused book compared to the first one. It focuses more on characters and their stories and their development, as opposed to the first book, which was more kind of plot driven in terms of it was more plot driven in terms of the epic fantasy sense. Like you had the warring political ideologies and these kind of things. Not so much for this book. This book is much more character focused. So it was an interesting follow-up to the first one, a very different book from the first one, but one that was really engrossing to read as a result of all of that. So I don't think this is the last in the series. I do believe there is one more. I'm very interested to see how Sungil Kim decides to wrap up everything now that we have this particular installment. So yeah. The third book I want to talk about is one of my favorite releases of this year, by one of my favorite authors, and that's Alex E. Harrow's The Everlasting. And in this one, we have a scholar who delves into the we have a scholar in an academic setting, very much an academic setting, who delves into the lore surrounding a key figure of his nation's history, when he gets co-opted by the government to essentially create propaganda surrounding this figure. And the figure is almost Arthurian in terms of in terms of their legend and the way the place that they hold in this nation's cultural fabric. But where it gets interesting is that the scholar ends up traveling back in time to meet this person, and the story just gets very meta from there. So Alex E. Harrow is an author who I have long decided since quite a few years now that everything and anything she writes I am going to buy, I'm going to pick up and read. And The Everlasting is just a great example of all of that. Like she's very creative at taking things, taking ideas that aren't necessarily new, that not aren't necessarily new. They're not new. They're very much tried and true tropes of the fantasy genre. She's very creative at picking those up and putting together a story, a really engaging story with just enough twists and turns to it that you feel like you're reading something new and exciting. And it's all because of the way that she can do that. And The Everlasting is just a standard example of that. Like this book is almost Arthurian in the way that it's handled without being Arthurian, which is really weird. But when you read it, you'll get it, and it just does so much. It does so much, and it does it so well. Like it just further cements her place as one of my favorite fantasy authors active right now. But yeah, moving on, we have Benedict Jacka's A Judgment of Powers, and this is essentially the closing up of a first arc within his larger Inheritance of Magic series. And this one we have a reckoning of sorts that comes to Stephen Oakwood. Like he has he over the course of the previous two books he's become embroiled with multiple factions who've been courting who've been courting him as an ally, and now he's at a crossroads where he has no choice but to choose, pick a side, and deal with the consequences of picking with that side. And not just that, he's being forced to grow, and this book is very much a reckoning in terms of how his as it says, A Judgment of Powers. Like this book is very much going to test the limits of his strength to meet these challenges. So in that sense, it's a very tense book, a very intense book, and as you can guess from that whole setup there, like it has quite a few action scenes and quite a few intense action scenes for this series. Like I think of the action scenes that we've had in these books so far, this book has like the most dramatic ones to date. But yeah, like as with most of the as with the previous installments in this series, it's very fast paced, very action packed, very fun. It just further cements this particular series as one of my favorite, or maybe, yeah, easily my top 3 urban fantasy series. This is definitely one of them. And like I said, this is meant to be a long series, broken up into kind of sub-arcs. This book wraps up the first kind of sub-arc, according to what I've seen online. So, yeah, you can expect that kind of tension in this book, and it delivers it well. But yeah, moving on, we have Kate Elliott's The Nameless Land. And this is the wrap-up to her Witch Roads duology. And I did not expect to enjoy this book as much as I did. Like, The Witch Roads was good, but The Nameless Land really brings things home in just all the best ways possible. Like, at this point, Kate Elliott has a really strong foundation to build on. In terms of the characters, in terms of the setting and all of that. And this book, she just does exactly that. She just snatches you from the get-go and just relentlessly drags you through the story. Like at this point, this book opens by shattering everything we assumed was fact when it comes to this world and this setting in terms of the politics and all of that, and it just goes relentlessly from there. In addition to that, it has some really emotional, some serious emotional punch to it because of the way that the first book worked and now the situation that we find ourselves in with this particular book. So, like I said, it really engaged a really big emotional punch to it, and this was my first series by Kate Elliott. And given how she handles this, it made me that much more excited to finally get to her 7-book epic fantasy series, which I am going to start very soon. So yeah, to keep things moving on, we have James Logan's the Blackfire Blade, and this is his follow-up to last year's The Silver Blood Promise. And this book, it just continues the trend with this series. Like I mentioned in my review of the Silver Blood Prom is that it read like Scotland Light. That's very much a case of this book. It has that almost swashbuckling, like fast-paced, action-packed kind of story to it. It has the same kind of cyclical falling action, rising action kind of flow to it as well, much like the first book. Where this book is very different, and where I think it might break some of the magic for many readers, it nearly broke it for me, is that the character dynamics are very different in this book. In the first book, the heart and soul of that book was the dynamic between Lucan and Flea. This book, we have a third character who's part of the posse, and as a result of that, like the dynamics between the characters is very different. Like there's a bit of tension, there's a bit of struggle, growing pains as they learn to grow and trust each other and all of that. So as a result of that, this book is not necessarily as fun to read. That being said, we are in another part of the world. James Logan has some has some creative twists that he put to this story. Some things you could smell coming a mile off, and all of that. But all in all, a solid installment into the series, a fun one. I think if I had to weigh the two, I would have to say I like the Silver Blood Promise more than I like this one. But this one was really good as well. No, that's not taking away anything from this particular book. So if you're a fan of the series, you can absolutely pick this one up and just and keep going with it. The next book, I actually debated whether I should even bother to talk about it here, because in many ways it's just it's a bit of a disappointment, but I'll talk about it, and that's Travis Baldry's Brigands and Bread Knives. And the reason why I decided to talk about this one is because he took this book in a very different direction. Like the previous two books have been all about that cozy fantasy vibe, whatever. This one is a much more standard, generic fantasy, in the sense that we have a kind of almost quest that the character goes on, and as a result of that, because there was this conscious decision to move away from the cozy fantasy vibe of the previous two books, it kind of made this book way more generic than the others. And why that's significant is because, to start with, everything about this series is very generic by intention. It's meant, the whole concept of the first two books was to present a very cozy situation in a very generic fantasy setting. So when you extract that cozy factor, what you're left with is very generic fantasy. So that's kind of what happens with this book. We have very generic characters who go through very generic situations and all of that. There is a character arc that might work for most readers, whatever, but it just, because of all of that, like, it ultimately just came out as like an okay read for me. The main reason I decided to include it, even though it is because of the fact that Travis Baldry was willing to take the series in a new direction, to try something new with it, which I respect. But when it comes to actually enjoying this book, it doesn't. It really doesn't do it for me. It really didn't, because once you take away that factor that made these books unique, then you're really left with nothing that isn't generic. So do with that what you will. But to keep moving on, the next book I have to talk about is the savior of the entire month of November, because the other major releases for that month did not live up. And the book I'm talking about is Stephen Erickson's No Life Forsaken. And this is the second book in the Witness trilogy. And this one, we get a very different story compared to the first. Like, once again, this is a book, given the title and all of that, it's supposed to be Carson Orland's trilogy, but that's very much not the case with this one. What we have is a story where, with a particular Malzahn detachment that are in a town that is about to blow up. Like, this is very much a whole Night of Knives scenario that's about to go down in this town. On top of that, we have a confluence that's about to go down. So, yeah, that's all I'll say about the plot of this book, because as with the first one, this book is very much a sequel to the Malzahn Book of the Fallen series. Like, especially for fans of the second book, Dead House Gates, you're going to enjoy this particular book and just some of the things that it touches on and all of that. Like, we revisit some We revisit some key characters from their house gates. We kind of see the way that the Malzahn Empire has evolved from that time to now, and there's just so much to talk about with this book, and I'm sure there's whole slews of YouTube channels doing dedicated talks and live streams or whatever to it. So I leave the deep dives to those. Needless to say, if you're a Malzahn fan, you have to pick this one up. And it is the saving grace of November for me, because they are the two major releases of the month. I refuse to talk about one of them that rhymes with Smith, and the other one, James Islington, was a really solid book. I enjoyed it when I read it, but it didn't stand out as much as I expected it to, compared to The Will of the Many. Actually, yeah, that's the next book I want to highlight. Not Stephen Erickson. James Islington's The Strength of the Few. This is the follow-up to last year, to The Will of the Many. And The Will of the Many, it's a very different book from The Will of the Many. What we essentially have in this book is three POV characters that we have to follow. Two of them who go through Bildungsromans, and the problem with that is that it kind of feels like it should be a starter book as a result of that. But where it gets cool is what James Islington does with his book in terms of the world building. And as with the first book, this is very much a story inspired by the Roman Empire, but through the POVs, we see two whole new sections of two whole new worlds. You can see that once again draw on historical Roman Empire precedent, whatever you want to call it. So he does some creative things there, and this book very much progresses the larger conflict. We get a clearer picture of what exactly is going on and all of that. All of that being said, because of the fact the story is now split among three characters and all of that, I feel like as a result of that, it lost some of the emotional intensity. There's still this is still a very engaging story. I still enjoyed the hell out of this when I read it. It's still very much one of the best releases of the year for me. But when you compare it to The Will of the Many, there's really no competition. The Will of the Many is simply a better book. And this one, it both progresses the story, whilst at the same time, by its very nature, it's forced to do quite a bit of stage setting. So now that it's out of the way, I'm expecting things to go really well in the next book. And I enjoyed this more than enough that I am absolutely going to be there for the next book on release day. And I have two more books left to highlight. The first of those two books is Sheldon Costa's The Great Work. And this is a standalone historical fantasy that it draws very much on the expansion of America's expansion and the Wild West and that kind of thing, where we have almost we have the story of a mortician who goes after who sets out to kill a giant salamander that he believes was the reason why his friend died. And what we end up going on this journey is just a tale across a fantasy version of the Wild West and all the social and political trouble that entails, while at the same time being very much character journeys, because the main character is accompanied by his nephew, and they both have their challenges, they both have their emotional they both have their ideologies that they kind of grow into over the course of this book. So it's this is a book, one of those fantasy novels that kind of threads the line between literary and genre fantasy. I would say it's more on the genre fantasy side, but it deals with the kind of topics and ideas that I would expect to find more in a literary setting. That being said, it doesn't shy away from some of the genre conventions. Like there's some pretty brutal scenes in here, action and adventure, these kind of things. It can get very strange, it can get very phantasmagoric, it can get very brutal. It's a really good book, a really interesting fantasy standalone. And if you're interested in it, it's definitely worth reading. the final book I want to talk about is a book that was actually shipped out to me 3 weeks ahead of the publication date, which is the only reason I could talk about this book, because it technically releases publicly December 30th, but I got my copy December 13th, and you will not hear me complain about that whatsoever. And this book is The Awakening of Roku, the 6th book in the Chronicles of the Avatar series, and the 2nd book in the Avatar Roku duology. And this book, I said in my review of the first book that Randy Uribe, he did such a brilliant job of handling the character of Avatar Roku. He doubled down where it comes to this one. Like, he did such a brilliant job of crafting the story of us. We at this point in time, we're following Avatar Roku. He's now mastered airbending, and he's now setting out on his journey to master waterbending when he becomes embroiled in a plot to stop the assassination of to stop the destruction of the Northern Water Tribe, essentially. And along the way, like over the course of the story, Randy Uribe does just a brilliant job of handling these characters. Not just Avatar Roku, he handles Mongyatsu in a way that when you read how Gyatso's portrayed, you can't help but think of the way that Avatar Aang is, and you can just see the way that just the huge influence that Mongyatsu has had on the Avatar in literally two reincarnations. As a result of that, we see the progression of the story between Roku and Sozin, and how it eventually becomes what it like the choices that are made by both characters that eventually lead to it becoming the situation that we're familiar with from watching Avatar The Last Airbender, when we get a flashback to Roku telling his story and how that panned out. And another really cool thing he does is to introduce a new character and to have this character work in parallel with multiple storylines, specifically tying them back to the previous book, so that we see the parallels there, and we kind of have to decide how we're going to handle this character before it's eventually revealed what's the situation with this character. So and he does all of this while inserting just so many little seeds and nuggets that kind of harken to Avatar lore as a whole, and to tie into the Avatar Last Airbender series and all of that. It's just really well done. On top of being just a really good story on top of all of that. Like, this book ended up being one of my favorite books of the year, just because of how well it's crafted. And it made me really excited to read more of what Randy Uribe is going to do in the future. Hopefully, he's going to be writing more stories featuring another Avatar. So, yeah, these are my favorite releases of favorite fantasy releases of books that came out in the last 3 months. If there's one that dropped that is listed here or I didn't mention, feel free to drop a comment and let me know. And yeah, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.